Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Hancock, and along with my shadow-seeing friend Patrick Curran, we make up Quantitude. We're a podcast dedicated to all things quantitative, ranging from the relevant to the completely irrelevant. In today's episode, we talk for the third time about power analysis, drawing on a recent paper by myself and Yi Feng at UCLA that reminds us how little we actually know when sample size planning, and then offers a concrete, cautious strategy for planning in the face of that uncertainty. Along the way, we also mention Punxsutawney Phil, acknowledgments, bold-ass titles, dark matter, driving angry, crystal balls, Ned Ryerson, shock absorbers, King Henry IV, yard sales and haggling, hurricane insurance in Denver, and perineums and pessimums. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Far be it from me to ever question your decisions related to the podcast. In 6.5 years, I don't think I've ever done that once. What the hell was that with the music?
You know what movie that's from, right?
Well, of course I do. It's like one of the greatest movies ever made in Groundhog Day. My question was not what was the music from. My question is, why is the music there?
Okay, well, let's take a little trip down memory lane here. 6 years ago, we had an episode. In fact, it was our second episode, really the first episode of content that we ever did. Do you remember what topic that was on?
I do not.
I'm going to give you a hint. It involved poop emojis.
Oh, power!
There you go. I'm so glad that association is in your mind.
In a 30-year career, one of my few legitimate contributions to quantitative methodology. Poop emojis and power analysis.
And then 3 years later, we had another power analysis episode where we laid out some of the architecture for how you think about power analysis in a structural equation modeling framework. And now here we are, pretty much exactly 3 years later. And so now do you know why I have played that theme music for you?
Poop emojis.
Look into my eyes. Focus.
If I just randomly yell that out, I seem to be right. Oh, because Groundhog Day keeps happening over and over again, and we're going to talk about power today.
That's right.
Really? This is the third time.
Okay, I am now officially with you.
So I never remember, do you see your shadow and then it happens again, or do you not see your shadow? I never remember.
I think it's the groundhog. I don't think it's you.
Punxsutawney Phil emerged and stated in Groundhogese, I definitely see a shadow. Sorry, folks. 6 more weeks of winter.
So I think basically what happened is you and I woke up, we saw our shadow, and that means it's time for another power analysis episode.
Okay, I don't think that's how Groundhog Day works.
Well, I know it doesn't involve poop emojis, okay? just look pretty, okay? Okay, so to recap, yes, we're having another power analysis episode, and it's because, honestly, we did talk about how power analysis works. We talked about how to get at it within an SEM framework, which covers a lot of ground, not just SEM related, but GLM related and other stuff. But there's still a lot of stuff left to say, I think.
We groused in the first one, and then we actually groused in the second one as well. But what we talked about in that second episode, and I think it was even called something along the lines of the power of what?
Yes,
right.
Very
so you
good.
have these very complicated models, and a reviewer says, well, what is your power? Which is a silly question because one regression coefficient, multiple regression coefficients,
right.
Explained variance, a covariance, a random effect, a fixed effect. I mean, what? A single model could have 10 different power estimates for different parts of the model.
That's right.
But the other thing was to use the methods that we described, and one was analytically based and one was simulation based. You had to be very, very specific about the parameterization of your model. Not only the things that you were interested in, but even more importantly, the things that you were not interested in, that we would never realistically know in practice.
And that is where today's story begins.
So this is going to be an easy recording for me. I'm going to make myself a little drink here, and I'm going to put my feet up. You and E wrote a paper on this that had, I might add, one of the best acknowledgments that I've ever seen in my life. Can I open with the acknowledgments to your paper, and then you tell us about the paper?
Okay, this is a paper with Yi Feng that came out recently.
It is in Psychological Methods, and this is part of the acknowledgments. We are most grateful to Fred Oswald, Roy Levy, Ethan McCormick, and Dan McNeish for their helpful comments on earlier versions of this work. Patrick Kern also provided comments. That maybe is one of my proudest representations of my name in the scientific literature right there.
Since you have the paper in front of you and you provided comments on the paper, would you be kind enough to read the title because I don't have it in front of me?
You don't know the title of your own paper.
It got too long because reviewers wanted stuff added, so I don't remember exactly what it is.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
NMAX and the quest to restore caution, integrity, and practicality to the sample size planning process. That is a bold-ass title.
It's so bold of you to choose that. It's incredible. You must be a very, very strong person.
Well, this paper was born out of a lot of dissatisfaction with things that we do in power analysis, some of which we've alluded to in prior episodes, but we actually tried to make things better, which is unusual for us.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
I know. But let me set this up. I'd like to start with imagining that we have a model, a general linear model, with three variables. We've got a key predictor, which we're just going to call X. We've got a key outcome we're going to call Y. And let's say we've got some control variable Z. Okay, so X is predicting Y, and that's what we really, really care about. And Z is in there for control purposes, which means that Z correlates with the other predictor, X, to some degree. And Z has its own influence or predictive value on Y. So a very simple multiple regression style model with two predictors, one outcome. For simplicity, we're going to assume that everything is continuous for what we're going to talk about, although we can mix that up a little bit. And let's also, for simplicity, think about all three of those variables being in a standardized metric so we don't have to worry about the units of those things. Is that okay to start?
Yes, done and done.
Okay, good. And for that particular model, there are three key parameters. One is the path from X to Y. And let's assume that's a focal path from our perspective, which means that is the path that we care about. That is the path that we want to make sure that we have an adequate sample size to be able to detect. We also have a correlational parameter relating X, the predictor, and Z, the covariate. And then we have this other structural relation between Z and the outcome. So there are three parameters in this model, but I'll tell you only one of them for our purposes is going to be focal. We're going to think of the other two parameters as really just setting the context for the key parameter that we want. And if you say, maybe I'm interested in the other structural relation too, that's fine. We could just imagine focusing then on that one instead. Because usually when we approach power analysis or sample size planning, not always, but usually we think about it on a parameter by parameter basis. Do I have a big enough sample size to detect this relation that's important to me? Do I have a big enough sample size to detect this relation that's important to me? So we're just going to be focusing on one relation, but we really could be focusing on any relation.
We have really good methods analytically, meaning we can derive these. We have really good methods simulation to get an exact power estimate for that X to Y relation, with the minor poke in the eye that we need to identify the correlation between X and Z and the Z to Y relation.
Exactly right. So imagine that each one of those three parameters has this full span of values that it could be in theory. So that focal parameter has a whole bunch of values, that correlational parameter has a whole bunch of values, and then that control path has a whole bunch of values. And those could be taken to define a three-dimensional space where each of the axes is those values. Well, first of all, not all of those values are possible, right? There are certain combinations of values that couldn't even exist. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you when people come into your office and they tell you these values and then you go over and figure out the matrix that they imply and you realize it couldn't actually occur, right?
Yep.
So of all those possible values, there's parts of that three-dimensional space that couldn't even occur. And so let's imagine those regions are dark. And now at the intersection of each of those other combinations of the three values, we could imagine these little floating ends throughout this whole space where if we pick three values, we go, ooh, what's the n at the intersection of that? The sample size needed to detect our focal parameter. Ooh, what's the n over there? What's the n over there? So we've got this whole big space of possibilities. But in order to do that, we would have had to have picked a level of our power to begin with. What level of power do people usually pick in your office?
Well, I mean, the gold standard that was set by Cohen, 40 or 50 years ago is 0.8. Mm-hmm. So if you say you have a power of 0.8, it says if an effect really exists in the population, given your parameter values and your sample size, you have an 80% chance of finding that effect.
I like all of that, except maybe the 80%. I have to tell you that bothers me. I go with the 80% a lot, but if you think about what that means, you are willing to enter into a study with a 1 out of 5 shot that you're not finding the thing that you are designing an entire study to find. That bothers me on some level.
Under best case scenario.
Best case
scenario. All right. Now, first, I mean, if you go back historically, Cohen was like, I don't know. I mean, we need a value. It seems like 4 out of 5. And it's kind of like the P less than 0.5 as people lose their minds about it. And yeah, it's completely arbitrary. Cohen was like, look, we got to make a table at a given power. And 0.8 is as good as anything else, I suppose. All right. But here's the thing. You and I fly quite a bit.
Yeah.
Imagine that you get on to your flight and you get settled in and they say there is an 80% chance that this plane is going to land after we take off. That's really good, right? It's way better than 50-50. Like, nobody's going to argue about that.
This must be JetBlue.
Yeah, JetBlue and Spirit are more like 40.
I was on a Spirit Airlines flight, and there was like a medical emergency. You know, when they come on, they're like, is there a doctor on board? And everybody was panicking, and I was just like, there's no doctor on a Spirit Airlines flight.
Spirit.
Would you stay on an airplane if there was an 80% chance you're going to land? And obviously, it doesn't apply directly here, but if you're designing $1 million study on a really important topic, are you going to be sitting on that airplane if there's a 1 in 5 chance you ain't getting off?
Yeah. Do you feel lucky?
Well, do you, punk?
Exactly.
Right?
Well,
Clint Eastwood had it right the whole time.
You could ask yourself the question, do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Doing your study is not Groundhog Day, right? You don't get a chance to do it over and over and over and relive it.
I'm reliving the same day over and over. Groundhog Day. Today.
You are doing it probably one time, and that means training your researchers, developing your instruments. Think about all the work that goes into your study, and just the idea that we're willing to say, I don't know, 4 out of 5 shot of finding the thing. There's a part of me that is really bothered by that.
Now, this particular point is not directly related to this paper.
You're right. This is not the topic of the paper, but it's a little bit of a theme underlying the work that I'm about to describe to you, and that is that I am an inherently cautious person, and I have this internal belief that if you are going to go to all the trouble to design a study, you better get everything lined up to give yourself the best shot. And if you don't agree with that, then everything else that we're going to say, you'll just kind of go, whatever. But it seems to me that if your study is important enough to do, it is important enough to plan for it and be very thorough in that.
I was intrigued about this notion of the space, especially because it has dark matter. And so there's this unknown and it's a space. And we have this hard science envy. And so I'm kind of liking this. Tell me more about this.
So there's the space where its axes are defined by the different parameter values that we could have for the 3 parameters of our model. And I said that there are little ends floating in space at the intersection of all of those. That, first and foremost, requires us to choose a level of power. Whether we choose 0.80, 0.90, 0.95, whatever value we choose, let's assume that that has been chosen. And then we used whatever method we talked about before to be able to figure out what the sample sizes could be in that space. So one of the axes that we have represents the key parameter we're interested in, that focal parameter from X to Y. And when we're doing power analysis or sample size planning, we don't say, ooh, what are all the values it could be? What we do is we set some level of that for ourselves. And historically, what people have been advised to do is to set the effect size for that at the level that you think it is. And then there's a lot of literature that says that's a very hard thing to do. And it is a very hard thing to do. I am more of a mind that you set that focal parameter at the smallest value that is of interest, that you think will make a difference in the lives of whomever you are studying.
Well, it's the statistical equivalent of hitting a deer with your 13-year-old Prius, right?
You had to bring that up.
I did a week ago. Greg hit a deer with his Prius that is 13 years old.
Don't drive angry. Don't drive angry.
And I have ridden in this, I think, for all 13 years. And he sent a picture to the insurance company, and the woman said, yeah, it's totaled. Greg was like, no, I want it fixed. And so he pushed and pushed and pushed. And last night he texted me a picture of the aforementioned Prius with the hood tied on with a bungee cord so that Greg could drive it to the repair shop to have it fixed. So when you say that you're conservative and cautious, that is the equivalent of demanding that your 13-year-old Prius be repaired.
That's right. We're all basically totaled and held together by bungee cords.
Exactly. It is in that spirit, and you use this term in the paper, hope for the best but plan for the worst, is to tell a review group, look, if things go sideways on me, like if everything bad that could possibly go bad happens and the deer jumps out in front of me, I still have a fighting chance to find an effect if an effect exists.
And so we choose that level of that focal parameter that we care about, that path from X to Y. Maybe you choose 0.3 in a standardized metric, or maybe you choose 0.2, or maybe you choose 0.1. It is your job to defend what is the smallest size that people are going to care about. And I think not enough thought goes into that, honestly. But it's one of the things that you're not leaving my office until you can defend the value that you're going to choose for that. But once you do that, think about this space with dark matter. Once you do that, what you're essentially doing is taking a slice out of that three-dimensional space, a slice that corresponds to that specific value for your focal parameter. And we know that if we actually have a bigger effect size, we're going to wind up getting extra power. And if we have a smaller effect size, we know that we're going to lose power, and we are willing to say that's okay because that effect size starts to get smaller than people can defensibly care about. So you have taken a slice there, and now in this model that we're talking about, you have this plane with all of the sample sizes through it, and on the axes of the plane, one of those is the correlation that you have between your predictor that you care about and this other control variable, which, I mean, I don't really care that much about that correlation, but that is one of the parameters of the model. And then on the other axis, you have that path that goes from the control variable, which I called Z, to your outcome variable Y, and it's just in there for control purposes. And honestly, I don't care about that value so much either. It's just in there as a control variable. If I look at that whole surface, sample sizes are so different across that whole surface. And what we said in the previous episode was, you tell me that correlational value, you tell me that value of the path from the covariate to the outcome, and that basically zooms us into one point in that plane, and then we feed it into a simulation program or we feed it into something analytical, and it magically spits out a sample size and we go on our merry way. And that's really where we left off on the previous episode. But the question is, where the heck did you get those values for the parameters you don't care about?
And realizing not caring about something doesn't mean it's not important, right? These are integrated systems.
Exactly. When someone's in my office and I say, you need to tell me a value of the correlation between the variable that you really care about as a predictor and this other covariate, now they have to answer that question. Where do they get the information for that? So if someone said, just as an example, the smallest effect I care about from X to Y is 0.3. And I say, okay, and you've convinced me that that's the case. And then they say, and the correlation that X has with the covariate is 0.2. And I kind of nod and I go, uh-huh. And they say, and the path from the covariate to the outcome is, let's say, 0.4. And I go, okay, sure. And I run it through whatever program I run it through. And the program says, congratulations, you're going to need a sample size of 69 to achieve 0.80 power. I say, that's great. But what if they got that correlation wrong? What if they got that other path wrong? That is going to put you at some other place in the plane. And the problem is the sample size that you need could be way bigger. I don't mean a little bit bigger. I mean way bigger.
For the same effect size.
For the exact same effect size. Exactly right. To detect that focal effect of 0.3, if you twiddle the knobs on the parameters you don't care about, you might need twice the sample size that you think you need. Your power might go from 0.80 down to 0.50 to 0.40 to 0.30. Really? And you want to enter a study and have a coin flip's chance of finding the thing that you designed your study for?
What a waste of time. I mean, for someone else, that would be an incredible waste of time.
But that's a very realistic outcome when you don't know what these other parameters are that define the context around the parameter that you do care about.
Oh, come on, dude. You're tilting at windmills here. 3 values. I got 2 regression coefficients, and I got a correlation. Do you think that I'm not going to know what those values are?
That is completely correct.
Wait, I don't think that's what I was saying.
Wait, what was the question?
That was a nice jiu-jitsu move. I agree with you.
Good.
Oh, I'm so confused.
Okay. One of those parameters you set at the smallest level you care about. That's your focal parameter. I get it. But the other 2, I don't think you're going to know what those values are. When someone's in my office and they say, I think that the correlation between the X variable I care about and the covariate is whatever they say it is, 0.2. And I say, okay, where did you get that? And they say, well, I mean, from the literature. I say, okay, did the literature use the same subjects that you're studying? Well, they're not exactly the same population of it. Oh, okay. Did they use the same measures of your predictor and your covariate? Well, they weren't measured exactly the same way. Oh, okay. So I can ask a series of questions that leaves the person a whole lot less sure in the value that they give me. And then the kicker is when they tell me a value for the path from the covariate to the outcome, and they say something like, well, I think that's 0.4. I ask all of the above questions, and then I say, oh, that 0.4, by the way, where did you get that? Well, it's from the literature. I go, oh, okay. And the literature had the exact same variables in this model because that's a partial slope, right? That's above and beyond the other variables in the equation. Well, the other research didn't have exactly the same variables in the equation. I mean, it takes very few questions to completely demolish the witness on the witness stand to realize that they don't know jack about what's going on in that context.
This is why I'm your only friend. Because these are your colleagues, right?
I'm just touched that you said you're my friend. Thank you. So the idea of this paper that we mentioned is, first and foremost, that you don't know jack.
That was the working title. NMAX, you don't know jack.
Actually, the working title for me, there's a great line in a song by the Beastie Boys called Sabotage that says, your crystal ball ain't so crystal clear. And that to me is the fundamental problem with sample size planning, is that in order to do it accurately, you have to be able to tell the future perfectly of a study that hasn't been done before. And you got no shot going into that, right? You can't possibly do it. The goal of our paper is to just acknowledge that you have this limitation going in, and as you said, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And the study is all about how to plan for the worst, how to create an insurance policy. Going back to Groundhog Day has one of the greatest characters. Do you remember
What's
that
his
guy?
name? Ned something?
Ned Ryerson.
Now, don't you tell me you don't remember me, because I sure as heck fire remember you.
Ned Ryerson?
Bang! I sell insurance.
What a shock.
Do you have life insurance?
The paper that E and I wrote is essentially being the annoying insurance person, Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day.
Am I right or am I right or am I right? Right.
We want to create a policy for you. And what is it covering you against? It's covering you against your own ignorance. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean, you can't very well know what's going on in these other parameters. And so what we did mathematically is we figured out for the other parameters in this model, what are the worst case combinations that they could have at different levels of correlation that you might have between your predictor and the covariate that would lead you to need the biggest possible sample size. And once we figured that out, it yields a sample size that we refer to as Nmax. It is the maximum sample size that you would need to detect that effect under the worst collinearity that you might reasonably expect. And you don't even have to choose the structural parameter value for your covariate because it automatically says, what is that perfect storm that could be operating against you? And if you said, but I know what that value is, I would say, okay, well, if you know what that value is, let's go ahead and do it. But if you don't, and I strongly suspect you don't know what that value is, then this quantity that we derived, Nmax, will help to insure you against not knowing what's actually operating out there against you.
And all of this conversation is in a system that only has 3 observed relations: X with Y, Z with Y, and X with Z. None of us are doing work like that. You're not going to get funded for doing work like that. Imagine, though, that you have 5 predictors, 3 mediators, an outcome. Oh boy, I should have done the math beforehand. That's 5 and 8 and 9 measured variables. 9 times 8 divided by 2 is 36 unique elements. What it makes me start thinking of is I'm going to move from the smashed-in Prius to a shock absorber. This really is the level that I understand statistics, and anybody who's had a class from me can attest to that. There's still a thing that we're really interested in, and then a bunch of stuff that exists and is important, but we're kind of not interested in. And I got a hankering to try to build a shock absorber that represents that other stuff that maybe doesn't need to be articulated in as much detail as the simulation model or is in the analytic model. You help us try to do that in this paper as well.
I love that analogy. That is exactly what we tried to do.
Bing again.
And the model that you described, which I would dare you to describe again because I don't think you could. But just imagine, right? We started with a model where there was a focal predictor and outcome, and then we had one covariate in there. But what you did is you essentially said, yeah, but what if there are other variables in there maybe that are independent variables? What if there are other variables in there that are maybe dependent variables? And so you have this more complex system. Well, what we tried to do in this paper is to collapse down into this shock absorber, which I love that description, into this shock absorber for all the other contextual information that you don't care about. What I mean by that is you don't care about its exact value, but you absolutely want to make sure it's present in your model, but you can't articulate the actual values associated with it. So if you had, let's just extend it to a multiple regression model first with way more covariates, then what we did is we said, well, we can collapse all the information in all the other covariates down into effectively behaving as though it is a single other covariate. And we know how single other covariates function because we derived Nmax for that scenario. If we have a larger model with other dependent variables, what we do is we talk about how we can take that larger model, and if you went to that model and you said, ooh, I care about this path right here, and this path, and this path, and this path, and I want to make sure that I have a big enough sample size to detect each of those things, then what we talk about in the paper is how you can take this little template that has a predictor, an outcome, and then some collection of covariate information that we can think of as smushed down into this one symbolic covariate composite. Then you can think about that as being this little cookie cutter that you can sort of move around the larger model that you have and use it to think about what sample size you would need to be able to detect the things in your model. And the cool thing, whether we're talking about a bigger multiple regression model or we're talking about a bigger measured variable path model, if you figure out what the worst thing is that you're planning for in your model, then that covers you for the entire model. In fact, it essentially covers you for all possible path models that could be wrapped around your focal parameter. So if I gave you some complicated model and you said, these are the 4 paths that we really want to make sure we have a big enough sample size to be able to detect, then what I can say is, well, let's go to the worst one, the one that is the most challenging.
Watch out for that first step. It's a doozy.
And essentially collapse into this shock absorber around that, all the other relevant information in the model, set it to a worst case scenario kind of setting, which includes the collinearity, how bad that might be able to get, and then how bad the relations could get from that contextual information to the outcome variable that we're talking about locally right there. And we can figure out the sample size, and it doesn't care what the rest of the model is that's wrapped around it. In fact, if someone came into my office and said, I want to be able to do a measured variable path analysis where I can detect a 0.2 standardized path in that model, then with a couple of questions, I can tell the person what sample size they're going to need, largely irrespective of what the model is going to be that's going on around it, as long as that person can articulate a level of conservatism around how much multicollinearity, it's a little bit more complicated than that, it's called metacollinearity, but it's similar to multicollinearity, how much collinearity your key predictor has with the other variables in that smushed shock absorber. And that becomes so useful because it means that someone doesn't have to and ha and come up with some values in my office for those, what'd you say, like 36 things that they couldn't possibly know?
Right.
And E and I thought that that would be a very useful thing to arm people to be able to do.
And to keep some of your friends.
My one friend. So the upside of this is that it greatly simplifies the sample size planning process for any model that is a special case of a measured variable path model. So that includes regression and t-tests and ANOVA and measured variable path models. Any questions that are represented by parameters within that model, we can use this framework to do sample size planning without having to articulate values for all of the parameters in the model. That's a win. The downside, of course, is that this is automatically assuming something that's very conservative, something that's going to guarantee that you have at least the amount of power that you say you want. So if you say you want 0.80 power, under other frameworks, you might wind up with a little more power, you might wind up with less power. This is saying, no, that's the bottom it could have, and you are probably, because you don't live under a rain cloud at all times, you're probably going to wind up having more power than that. And that means, like Ned Ryerson is trying to sell us the insurance policy, that means that it is going to insure you against things that might be worse than you will actually face.
This is not an issue of making it easier, right? It's not like, I don't want to fill in all those values. That's such a pain. I got stuff to do. This is way easier. This is more realistic. This is a better representation of what you actually know about what it is that you're studying. So don't get in your mind, this is just a shortcut to save a couple hours on the computer. What you're doing is in using this shock absorber, we don't know what those 36 individual values are for a 9-variable system, and we're trying to get a more realistic estimate. So that's kind of point one. And then point two is, just as Clint Eastwood said,
man's got to know his limitations.
think about writing in a grant application. We have every reason to believe that we're going to be able to execute the study in the way that we describe. But if things go sideways, we've still got a 0.8 chance of finding an effect. And that's our lower bound. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, as somebody who has read a whole lot of grant applications, to me, that has a level of honesty in it that I believe that argument more than a power of 0.824.
The underlying philosophy here that we just keep alluding to is that if a study's worth doing, we would say it's worth erring on the side of caution in planning it and not just stabbing at some numbers that I don't really have the ability to know about, right? Our models are just too damn complicated. Our study is too different from prior studies that have been done. We really can't know all of those things with certainty. And what happens, and I know that you've had this with people in your office too, you ask someone, well, what do you think this parameter is? What do you think this parameter is? And they will give you numbers and you will crank out a sample size. And then they'll say things like, well, what if this one over here was a little bit lower? Or what if this one over here was a little bit higher? And they start twiddling the knobs to try and get a sample size that they think is easier for themselves to work with. There's a great line in Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 2, where the king says to his son, "Thy wish was father, Harry, to that thought," right? They hope, maybe it could be this value, maybe it could be that value, as if somehow they're twiddling the knobs of the universe to make it so. And then in the end, they go, I like that sample size best. And so they go write up their grant proposal, like you just said, as though that is some truth that they're planning for. And, I've been in the room where so much motivated manipulation is happening on the part of these researchers. It can be entirely well-meaning, but in the end, all they're hoping for is that they get a smaller sample size. And it's very hard to sit in my office with someone who's basically treating sample size determination like it's a yard sale, right? And they're just trying to haggle me down to a cheaper price.
How much, quick? 20 shekels. They what? Wait a minute. Well, we're supposed to haggle. I haven't got time. Well, give it back then. No, I just paid you. But? Yeah. This bloke won't haggle.
That is not changing what's going on in the universe, and that's extremely bothersome to me. And I would much rather have them leave my office with a plan that acknowledges what they don't know and has a sample size that covers them for that lack of knowledge so they can go out and say, yes, as you said, more honestly, I have this level of power.
You want to protect the children you love, right? I mean, I've been involved in a lot of these projects where the reviewer is almost seen as the enemy. Like, how are we going to grease up this pig and get it through, get the smallest sample size? And I get it. I've been doing research for 30 years, right? Subjects are expensive. Subjects are hard to get. Resources are limited. You have limited amount of time to do a project. Okay, I'm not naive about that. But would you put your kid on a flight that had a 60% chance of getting to the next city?
Flight 209, now arriving, gate 8. Gate 9. Gate 10.
But why would you have your research, which you love and are committed to, and that you are going to invest blood and sweat and tears, and that best possible outcome is, even if there is an effect, I only have a 60% chance of finding evidence for it.
Yeah, and people will say to me, well, isn't this expensive? And I will say, what's more expensive, planning for the worst or doing a study that doesn't find anything? Which of those things is more expensive? Which of those things is more wasteful? And that's where I turn into Ned Ryerson, the insurance salesman.
Whole life term, Uniflex, fire, theft, auto, dental, health.
I mean, you're not trying to sell me a hurricane insurance policy in Denver. But hurricane insurance in North Carolina, that's a different story.
Exactly right. So we're trying to cover you because how many times are you doing this study?
Nope.
Look.
Nope.
If you had one shot.
We're not getting sued again.
Okay. But you are doing this study one time, right? And it's not very comforting to say, well, in the long run, it'll probably find it. This is your shot.
Nope.
You're no fun. Now, there's fine print, as, was it Bolin?
Yeah, Bolin, the fine print on maximum likelihood that nobody ever reads.
Right. So there's fine print with this method, too, in addition to stuff that we've already talked about. For example, this N-max quantity was derived under standard conditions, assuming that distributions of variables are as we assume under maximum likelihood. The nice thing is that E and I have been doing some simulation and have found this to be incredibly robust, which is good, and there will be more details shared about that in the future. This also assumes complete data. We didn't address anything about missingness, and quite honestly, missingness is a real problem. So we did not incorporate that into this. We have some ideas about how we think that's going to go, but we have not incorporated that into this work. We also have only been doing models with measured variables here, and as we've talked about in the prior episode, and as our listeners out there know, you do have measurement error, and sometimes you have latent variables with indicators in these larger models that include both measurement models and structural models combined, and this model has not incorporated anything to do with latent variables. So I think there are some good, as you always say, dissertation topics that can come out of this, next steps for this to go. But most importantly, E and I hope that this is an idea that people embrace, that if you're going to do a study, it is worth planning for the worst so that you can go out there and have the best shot of finding what you want.
And I love your use of the term to capture that, of finding the perineum of the model. Isn't that it?
No, it's the pessimum.
Not perineum. The pessimum.
The global pessimum is the worst case realistic scenario that you could have.
Oh, that makes so much more sense.
Global perineum. This is why we didn't acknowledge you with the helpful reviewers.
I haven't seen the movie for ages, but doesn't Groundhog Day end where he kind of becomes a better person and then he breaks the cycle and wakes up? And so maybe now you're a better person. I think you've broken the cycle of Power episodes.
Ned, I would love to stand here and talk with you, but I'm not going to.
That's it for me, folks. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
I got you, babe.
Oh, please, not again.
That is a great song.
No, it's not.
No, don't listen to this man.
Thank you so much for joining us. Quantitude has been brought to you by other forms of Groundhog Day that routinely occur in academia. The final dissertation defense, where, even after 30 years and dozens of meetings, not a single person in the room can remember how to properly fill out and sign the necessary paperwork. The weekly meeting with your graduate advisor, where your advisor makes precisely the same misplaced suggestions to you as last week, and the week before that, and the week before that, and the week before that. The undergraduate class, where each year the faculty member insists on quoting Beavis and Butthead in a futile attempt to connect with the students through his witty use of contemporary pop culture references. And by the revolving door installed in every university dean's office that allows you to truly appreciate the classic lyric from The Who, You can subscribe to Quantitude on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and please leave us a review. You can also follow us on X, Blue Sky, or Instagram. We are at QuantitudePod. And visit our website at quantitudepod.org, where you can leave us a message, find playlists, show notes, class syllabi, and other fun stuff. Finally, get cool Quantitude merch like mugs, stickers, and notebooks from redbubble.com, where all proceeds from non-bootleg authorized sellers go to donorschoose.org to help support low-income schools. You have been listening to Quantitude, the podcast you wish didn't occur over and over again.